your departments, who may be your family or friends who are not. But we'll get started then.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody, for joining the Sea Change webinar. That especially, I know this is summer, and I'm excited to have our two speakers who are talking about a project that transpired from what I understand the DALI work. And I'll let Kevin and Murphy take it away. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Alexis. So I'm Kevin Aptowitz. I'm a faculty member at Westchester University. I use he, him pronouns, and you'll see why explicitly I'm getting into that. And actually, let me go even farther and say that I am a cisgender, heterosexual, white male. So I basically check all the boxes of what you'd expect a physicist to be. And I'm excited to be here today to talk about the work that we've been in our department to broaden what it means to be a physicist and to think about who a physicist can be. So I am a professor of physics at Westchester University. I've been there for about 15 years, and I'll let Murph introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Murphy. My pronouns are they, them. I am an undergrad physics major at Westchester. I switched over from psychology, so the world of physics and all the fun dynamics in it were pretty new to me. I'm still adjusting to everything, but yeah, I will be going into my junior year. I do research with Dr. Aptowitz here, so I'm excited to get to share my experience and how our department is growing together.
And what Murph and I thought might be the best approach for this webinar, rather than to throw a bunch of PowerPoint slides with bullet points, is to really just focus on conversation. As you noticed in the title of the webinar, it's the idea of amplifying student voices. We're fortunate that Murph was able to carve out time to be here, so we have a student voice on the panel. And we thought that we would best be served by a dialogue, a discussion, a conversation of what's been happening at Westchester as we attempt to amplify student voices and create spaces for difference. So what we're going to do is I am going to get interviewed by Murph first, and then I will interview Murph, and then we'll have some kind of broader discussion questions that both of us can comment on. So that's our structure for today. Thank you for joining us. All right, Murph, you are up as the interviewer.
So just to open up, set the stage, what is the DALI? Why did our department work on the DALI? And if you could just give a little explanation of that for us.
Sure. So there's a lot of acronyms that are going to come at you, Murph, so get ready. So DALI is Department Action Leadership Institute. It was started by APS, American Physical Society, and AAPT, the American Association of Physics Teachers. And the idea behind the DALI, as I see it, as a participant in it, is that departments face difficult challenges. And those challenges require the departments to really institute change at a level that we're not used to. And departments without guidance, without a framework, without a structure, can really spin their wheels and they invest a lot of time making little progress, get frustrated, burned out. And so what the DALI attempts to do is provide a framework for departments to utilize to enact change in their departments. And sometimes these changes are challenging. You might be having a department under threat where the university wants to just shut down the department. Right? They might be really struggling with majors. They might have had some incident in the department that they're still recovering from and need to learn from. And so how do you go about making that change in the department? And the DALI, this institute, is there to train departments how to do it. Let me just also point out, I saw it jumped up in the chat, I think, that the DALI is part of the EP3 effective, look at my notes, effective practices for physics programs. And so that also is a framework that the DALI then utilizes to think about making change. And that answered the first part of your question, Murph. What's the DALI? Was there a second part to that question, or?
I think more so, why did our department specifically focus on DEI issues, and like
Yeah,
why was that our goal with the Dolly?
right. So I'll speak about my journey and how we got to the DALI, which was in the summer of 2020, when we were all stuck indoors. The AIP, another acronym, American Institute of Physics, I think. Man, I really got to write down all these acronyms. They released this report, the Team Up report, and they had a series of webinars, I think 3 webinars, to go over the findings of the report. And what it focused on was particularly African Americans in physics and the lack of representation, and what can we do about it. So I was really inspired by the actions that these organizing bodies were taking to try to address this problem. You know, I teach at West Chester University, which is a state school, as you know, Murph, and it serves a broad distribution of students. We're near Philadelphia, and so we get a number of students from Philadelphia, low-income students from Philadelphia with diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds. And as a department, after seeing those webinars, I thought, you know, we can do more. We really need to think about these issues at a more fundamental level. And the DALI provided the opportunity to do that. There wasn't for us a burning issue, but there was this long nagging issue that everyone in physics struggles from. And the DALI provided a framework to begin to get to make progress on that issue. And so that was the inspiration for us applying to be part of the DALI, and why we chose diversity, equity, inclusion as our focus for the DALI.
And then as the Dolly as like a whole, I know that we have discussed a little bit how it actually looked implementing it with doing surveys and having like bi-weekly meetings with students. Do you want to just talk very briefly about how it was implemented with students and how you were actively using it to look at DEI?
Right. So the DALI is training, you know, the change leaders, the organizers of these. They're called Department Action Teams, DATs, that are going to be situated at the university making the change. So the DALI is this institute that's helping the leaders lead their DATs to make the change they want to see at the institutions. So what would happen is Dr. Waite, the chair of the Department of Physics, and I would have these meetings with the institute, with a number of other change leaders at other institutions, all talking about our process and our successes and our failures and our next steps and reflection. At the same time, we were also organizing and organizing a DAT, Department Action Team, at our university to try to make make gains in DEI front. And so the DAT is kind of interesting, and it's a structure I wasn't used to. Normally in academia, when we want to address an issue, we form committees. And if you're an academic, you know this, right? There's lots and lots of committees. And those committees are for the most part made up of other faculty. What's unique about the DAT that we formed, and this is part of the structure of it, is you really don't want it just to be faculty. You know, you want students to sit on the DAT, to come share their perspective. You want maybe an associate dean or someone in admissions or people across campus to come and provide their perspective to the DAT. And so these DATs, then we would meet as a DAT every 2 weeks, review kind of where we're at, what we did, what we accomplished, and what were the next steps. And we would delegate responsibilities. For example, just to give you some insight, we had all these exit surveys of students who had left the major, chose another major, and they were just sitting there. No one had reviewed them. So we actually had the students on the DAT review them, A, because that was an important step to understand why students were leaving the major, but B, they could also provide the student perspective on the responses. And so they also could provide their lens into what these responses were saying and how it matched with their own experiences of making their way through the department. So that's an example of how the DALI/DAT worked.
And now moving forward, how do you think the Dolly, I know there was like one bigger experience with it, with the DATs and the meeting every 2 weeks. How do you think that progress is going to continue on?
Yeah, so it is, I think for me, my takeaways from taking part in the DALI and then forming a DAT and running a DAT and thinking about DEI issues and how I hope to continue the legacy of what we learned there. One of them, maybe the biggest one for me, is the idea of amplifying student voices, which is part of the message of this webinar. And so in order to understand issues, in order to make progress, you need to bring students into the room. You need to listen to students. You need to amplify their voices and their experiences. Too often, faculty might sit around brainstorming how to solve a problem when really the students might be the expert on what the issues are. And bringing them into the room can really help figure out solutions that are going to persist. And so that was one element of the DALI that I found useful, and that we're going to continue to work into our model of how we run the department. Another aspect of the DALI is, or that we learned from the DALI, another aspect of the DAT, is the idea of reflection, the idea that that you need to be reflecting on where you're at right now, where you want to go, what did you do, did it work? You want to be very thoughtful about your approach to making change. The DALI DAT is big on data collection. So you really want to try to understand what problem you're trying to address. And if you have a hypothesis about what's going on, do you have evidence to support that hypothesis, which then can help you figure out possible solutions. So as I think about the way that the being part of the DALI and then running a DAT has contributed to our approach of running the department, I think amplifying student voices, really having students play a central role in fixing issues, bringing up issues, coming up with solutions is one. And then the other one is try to make evidence-based decisions, and when possible, collect data to understand the issues you're trying to address.
Yeah, that all sounds really great. I know change is a long process and implementing it can be very hard without a plan. So it sounds like the DALI set a good framework and a good inspiration, and now we can continue with those gains moving forward.
Yeah,
and then
the other, talking about those gains moving forwards, the other piece that fuels my commitment to this, to the work, the DEI work in the department, and actually dovetails nicely with amplifying student voices, is it's critical for me to connect with the students to see the impact I'm having on student lives. I mean, that's why we love teaching, the impact we're having on student lives as we change the culture of the department. And that is for me, part of the fuel that keeps me going and keeps me motivated on continuing to enact change in the department. I think if my DEI work becomes more isolated, if I'm just doing committee work, then my focus can begin to wane. So, amplifying student voices, I think for me, it also helps me connect better with students and be more passionate about the changes that have to happen. And then just have the joy of seeing what happens when we do make those changes and we begin carving out spaces for different types of students to go on to have these awesome careers in physics.
And I know that when professors, especially in like hard sciences like physics, take the time to view their students as actual humans outside of grades, exams, and all the scary work stuff that we actually have to do when we're actually humans, I know that makes it a more welcoming environment and helps students to advocate for themselves, ask for help when they need it. So I think that it's beneficial for you in not burning out and continuing on as an advocate for the marginalized groups. And I also know that it is a big part in starting to create that space for us, which
Yes.
will be very beneficial to the department in the long run. And then
Yeah.
going off of that, I know for me, community in the physics world is very important. Just from your point of view, before we switch over to my interview, what role do you think community plays in persistence in the physics major? I know that lots of times people can change majors really quickly, and it can be a really hard major to stick with. So how do you think community can help support students?
Yeah, I mean, for my 15 years working as a faculty member, I've seen the power of community and how much that leads to persistence. And actually, your discussion of what it means to connect with a faculty member, whether it's with research or in the classroom, and how much that allows students to persist, to feel like they belong, is representative of what I've seen. And actually, I referenced earlier the Team Up report that was generated by AIP, and they talk about these number of factors that are important to increasing the retention and persistence and recruitment of African Americans in physics. And the number one factor that they state in their report, so they state these factors, the first one they list is belonging. That students need a sense of belonging in order to persist in physics. And that when they feel like they don't belong, that it's going to be very challenging. And we've seen that at Westchester University. For me, a great example of this is after your second year in the department, if there's enough students, we run a summer abroad program. So there's a modern physics where you spend 2 weeks on campus, 3 weeks. That'd be nice. In London, and you study modern physics during the day in the classroom, but then you go and tour some of these sites that are in England that are interesting sites in general, and then some that are connected to modern physics. The students who come back from that trip are just different. And they have a bond that then we see persist into their third year and their fourth year. And it really helps provide a support structure for them to get through the major successfully and be excited about their what's going to happen after Westchester. And so for me, that's all about a sense of belonging. They form that community. The community is formed around physics, around a physics identity. They feel like they belong here, and then they can leverage that to be successful in the field. And so I think community is critical. I think thinking about your department culture, thinking about not just being welcoming, that's step one, but actually allowing students to bring their full selves to the department and feel like that's okay and feel like they belong in the department. I think goes a long way to helping students persist in the major. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, are you ready to I got my list of interview questions here. You ready to
So
turn
ready.
the table? All right, here we go. So Murph, first, thank you so much for serving as president for UGP, which is our new student club. What is UGP and what role do you see it playing in the department?
So UGP is Underrepresented Genders in Physics. I kind of inherited the club. I pushed it through to the final stages, but I had inherited it. It had previously been SWIP, Society of Women in Physics, but as a non-binary person and taking the role of president, I figured I would, expand it a little bit to include a few other gender non-conforming identities, just so that we can create a little more space for folk like myself. But UGP is a group our goal is to create a safe space for historically marginalized genders in physics. And we do that by having meetings every week. We normally will talk about some of the challenges that we've encountered, have like a safe space for some ranting. And then we'll also we're building up now, but we're going to try to connect with other groups on campus to try to build up like an army of allies so that we are carving out a very intentional space for us to exist in the department. And I see it Really critically in the department. I think right now we're a very small group only because we're very new and we are working on recruiting more underrepresented genders in physics. But I think that in my next 2 years, with the group and with the department, I want to make it very known that we are a very intentional group and that we are here to support each other and create this sense of community. I know that a lot of people in physics, whether an underrepresented gender or not, suffer from like imposter syndrome in the department. I was at the PhysCon last August, and that was one of the main issues that we had all identified was imposter syndrome. So I think that this group may not solve issues, but it'll create a space for us to acknowledge them and to just be together in the major. Did that answer your question?
No, absolutely. And you know, I think shining, like imposter syndrome, shining a light, labeling it, bringing it out is the way that you then can deconstruct it and beat it, right? So
yeah,
yeah, I'm glad you brought that one up in particular. What are some of the barriers that groups like UGP face in functioning?
So one of the main barriers that I noticed at Westchester was just peers and faculty lacking the knowledge and understanding of why this type of group is necessary. I know that in history, we have seen that it has been like a male-dominated field, and it can appear that now those barriers are gone. Like anyone can join this major, anyone can stick with it. But when we take a step back, we can see that while we all can enter the major, it is still a very, especially physics is a very male-dominated major. And there are definitely barriers to us succeeding in it. And that starts from, I mean, like elementary school, just how we're conditioned into thinking like, these people are capable of doing math and science, and these people maybe shouldn't. So I think that just having the awareness that there is an issue in culture and that we do need to be really intentional about carving out this space is one of the biggest barriers. And then that also comes with informing faculty and peers. That also can be a barrier. It can feel really uncomfortable for the marginalized group to feel uncomfortable in the field and then advocate for themselves if they're already feeling a little unsafe, a little out of like they don't have that sense of belonging, then being brave enough to kind of like push through the door and be like, I am uncomfortable here and I also see these issues and I think we need this group. It can just feel really intimidating to try to push our way into new things when the peers and the faculty don't have that understanding and maybe are, I know it can get into like a us versus them mentality of if you identify an issue that then the group may get defensive, which I don't think is anyone's goal to make people defensive or to be attacking, but just when issues are brought up, it can be uncomfortable. And I think that can be a really big barrier. So having the support of faculty and slowly growing our allies, I think is a really good first step into like overcoming that barrier.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the idea of allies. So just reveal, I'm the advisor for this. So Murph and I have discussions about the club and how to continue to build it in the department. You know, you bring up allies, and I do think that was a confusion in the department initially. They saw it as almost like a secret society of you've been tapped only if you have these traits to be in this club, and you're special and you're privileged and you're in this isolated club and no one else can be in it. And in reality, really, it's about changing systematic structures to these that are impacting these marginalized groups, and that can be done by anybody. You don't have to be the marginalized group to care about those things or to take some of the burden of making those changes. And so I think one of the things that you and I have talked about is really trying to increase that invitation of allyship, of letting everyone know you're welcome to join us, and we need you. We need allies to make these changes. And I feel like that somewhat diffuses the us versus them mentality that you had mentioned, and makes them know that they're invited, that they're welcome to join us as long as they share the same mission that the student group is focused on. You mentioned this concept of being intentional, which I find interesting. I mean, that kind of dovetails into what I was saying earlier about what I learned from Dolly and the importance of really being thoughtful and intentional with your work, being evidence-based, everything else. So could you speak a little bit more about that idea of when you're trying to create this student group and have it flourish? What do you mean by it's critical to be intentional?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the culture that can feel uncomfortable for marginalized groups is not always conscious to the people making it uncomfortable. So I think one, just like acknowledging that and having everyone be aware that there is a culture that maybe needs to change, there are things that we can do differently, is just one like intentional thought process that we can all use. And I also think that a lot of science departments and physics departments are built for conformity. Like, this is your ideal student. This is what your ideal student looks like. This is how your ideal student performs. And if you don't check these boxes, like, what are you doing here? Like, find a new major. So I think that we have to take that like really big ingrained idea and slowly deconstruct that. And that has to be super intentional so that we know that it's okay if you fail an exam, you can make a comeback. It's okay if you don't look how the typical physics major looks. You are still welcome here. Since there is this conformity culture, we have to be super, super intentional about letting marginalized groups know that their voices and their authentic beings are wanted and valued in the physics community. And if we aren't making a point for that, and if we're not showing that we are trying, and a marginalized human looks at the physics department and sees like a male dominated field and isn't feeling like they want them there, then it's going to be much easier for that marginalized human to choose a different major that will take less like emotional energy and mental energy from them. So if we're not super intentional about showing these people that they're wanted and they're valued, then I think it's just those of us who really like the major and want to do it can, even like that emotional burden might be too much for them to persist through. So we have to make sure that everyone knows that they're wanted and valued in the community.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to some of the work that the faculty have to do. That we need to be thoughtful and intentional with our efforts around diversity, equity, inclusion issues. You often can find faculty who fall in the mentality, I'm just here to teach physics. That's what I teach physics. If you want to learn physics, great, I have office hours, but it's not my responsibility to kind of tackle these other issues. And with that mentality, that there's a lack of intentionality. What are you doing to make your department an inclusive space? How are you intentionally doing that? And so I think the work of UGP, also Underrepresented Genders in Physics, also speaks to the work that we could learn from as a department, how to do more intentional work around these issues, and that it's critical to think about things in that intentional manner. You mentioned conformity, and I was kind of curious to hear your thoughts on thinking about basically a simulation. So departments focusing on, come to our department, we will embrace you, and we will create this model of a physicist that the stereotype of a physicist, and that will simulate you into the field, and then that sometimes prevents students from bringing their full selves, right? They feel as though they have to pretend to be this thing that they're not, and they can't bring their full selves to the department because that is counter to the assimilation effort the department is trying to make. So can you
Yeah.
speak to that tension of kind of wanting to be an amazing, awesome physicist and having a great career in physics while still honoring your authentic self and not giving up those parts?
Yeah, I know that that has, in my personal experience, has been a big point of conflict in my being and my soul. I think everyone in the physics world has like the idea of the ideal physics major. And then if you fail to live up to that in any capacity, then that imposter syndrome and that lack of community can just like bonk you down and you're deterred from trying to persist at all. So it is super, super important that we're able to create space to be our authentic selves and also push each other to do our best in the major and to have big aspirations about our future careers. But I think that if we aren't allowing students to bring their authentic beings into the department and to maintain their just true souls, that they'll be so worn down emotionally that the burnout and the exhaustion are going to kick in way sooner, maybe before you graduate, maybe after. So it's just making sure that we're allowing people to be themselves and creating a safe environment where they feel comfortable to do so. And that comes with the community and UGP and being really intentional with these things. Because if people aren't being their real selves, if they're pushing that down, if they don't feel safe enough to bring their authentic selves to classes, to the physics lounge, the physics forum, to their peers, to their professors, then it is just an additional mental and emotional burden that will definitely take away from the joy and the fun that physics can be and that physics should be for people who are really passionate about it. And I think it can build resentment in those beings towards their peers, towards the department, towards physics as a whole, because they know that they really love this and they want to do it. And then they can't bring their beings to it and they can't be their authentic selves there. And that's a really like crushing reality. So I think when we are really intentional and slowly are carving out these spaces, safe spaces for people in UGP, and then once that's a safe place, then we can bring some allies in who are also safe people, and we can slowly like let people be their authentic selves, then we're going to have a much better time attracting and retaining these underrepresented genders in physics, because they'll see that if people can see me being my authentic being and doing decent in the world of physics, then I would hope that then they think like, maybe I could also do that. So I know like one thing I do to be very intentional when seeing new physics majors, we had a lot of tours happening at the end of spring semester. Anytime I would see anyone who looked or was a underrepresented, marginalized person in the field, I would make sure to personally like go up to them, have a conversation with them about their fears entering a physics world, and tell them the efforts that I can see our department making and that I know I'm making to try to create a safer space for everyone so that they feel decently supported going into this scary and challenging major.
Yeah, well, thank you, Murph, for doing that. And your comments also, it's interesting. It reminds me too of our discussion of imposter syndrome. So we know imposter syndrome, it's kind of rampant among everyone. Faculty have it, right? But if you're part of a marginalized group that you feel like you need to hide parts of yourself, right? Already you feel like you're an imposter because you're not being your true self. And how much that can then grab hold of you in other areas as well when you feel like you cannot be your authentic self. So yeah, it's a big issue. All right, I think that gets us through. Yep, that gets us through our back and forth. So we have a couple of more general discussion questions that we put on our list, and then we'll open up if anyone in attendance has questions. We can open up for that in a moment. But these general back and forth The first one, let's see, we wrote down is how do power structures in the department impact creating spaces for difference? Did you want to start off? You want me to start off?
Yeah, I can. I know for myself, entering the department, there are different power structures between students, the students who fit the typical physics student and the students who don't. And then there are also different power structures between student and faculty. And both of them play a really big role in creating space for difference. I think with peers, I think it's very intimidating with both to just have a conversation about this, which I think it's great that we are doing that now and creating space for it. I know with faculty, it can be really intimidating because this person has dedicated their life to physics or this career, like they're a professional in the field. And then they're also going to be grading your exams and you're going to be interacting with them for 4 years. So how can you bring up issues in the department without placing blame on faculty, but also acknowledging that there are issues that we all need to work together on? So it's just a really tricky dynamic to try to approach. I think that in our department, I had like a few bigger things that made it so I needed to speak up and I needed to create that space for myself. And then once that conversation got rolling, it was a lot easier. It's been a lot easier to continue it and to keep the rapport we have going. And I think part of that comes with faculty acknowledging that we're humans outside of physics and we have interests and passions and we also love physics, but we need to also be humans who can be imperfect and see things that need to change. And I think that also comes with faculty having the information and the education and knowing that if students come to us with these issues, we shouldn't disregard them. Like we should, if a student is brave enough to come to you with an issue, that this is probably an issue worth acknowledging and creating this space for.
So I wanted to take a moment to highlight, and I haven't done a deep dive into this program, but for those who are interested, I highly recommend looking at Being Human in STEM, the HSTEM program. I think it initially kicked off in Amherst in like 2016, but it's now spread to many other universities. And I actually wrote down a quote here. The goal of it is helping students, faculty, and staff collaboratively develop a framework to understand and navigate diverse identities in the classroom, lab, and beyond. But it's there, just as you're saying, so that people can bring their full selves, to bring their human selves, to be humans in the classroom and humans interacting, doing science, and how powerful that is in creating a sense of belonging in students, and that they're able to kind of bring that connection to the department. So, all right, from a faculty's point of view, I think the power structure stuff is interesting because we hold a lot of power, whether we like it or not. And it is our responsibility to think about the spaces that are existing in our department and what can we do to make them inclusive, even if that can be challenging. It can get into sticky issues. It's important for us to do that work for the health of the department. And also to recognize, I think, as faculty, that students look up to us for good or for bad in the opinions we hold. And so if we support a student group, if we support space for difference, that goes a long way in the minds of other students in supporting that student group and supporting that space for difference. And then on the other hand, if we show, even if it's just honest curiosity, if we begin questioning student groups or questioning the need for space for difference, that can really undermine the work of a student group. And that speaks to the power that faculty have in enacting change or being preventative of change. All right. So I think we're 3:45. Why don't we do one more question and then we'll switch over to the Q&A. If you do have Q&A, let's see here. I think in the chat, Alexis said Please use the Q&A for any questions that you might have. So feel free to drop those in there if you do have questions. So why don't we go with education plays a critical role in creating spaces for difference. Who is responsible for doing the educating, right? So I'll start off this time, Murph. And so this is definitely coming up around gender identity issues, gender expression issues. Why do we use pronouns? There are a lot of questions that are in the culture that then leak into a physics department. And in order to create space for difference, often education is needed for students and for faculty to understand these differences and to make sure that we're being inclusive. And so, it's everyone, often students are overwhelmed with work and schoolwork, faculty feel overwhelmed, and we often take a passive position in dealing with these issues, waiting for someone to come educate us if need be, right? If there's a crisis or a fire that has to be put out. And I see as a faculty member that I can't have my students be the ones who are expected to educate other faculty on an issue, let's say gender identity. When it's gonna put the student in perhaps precarious position, and B, really it should be on the faculty. It should be on the shoulders of the faculty to play an active role in understanding their students and making sure that they're creating spaces for their students. So the educating is a tricky one. What I have really appreciate about our relationship, Murph, is the dialogues that we've had. And so sometimes the education can come from a student, right? But then it can be amplified by the faculty member, and that I can carry that torch and make sure that I'm distributing that knowledge more broadly. And it's not on a single student who sees a need for change to kind of go around and educate everyone on the change that's needed. So I think it's important for allies and for faculty who wield power in the department to take some of that initiative and do some of educating themselves first, and then trying to educate others as well. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the education definitely is a team effort on everyone's part. I think part of it is having like that safe space so that the marginalized groups can speak up and bring issues to awareness if other people aren't aware of them, if faculty and peers aren't aware. So there's that necessity for the safe space. And then I think once the marginalized voices are heard, that the burden should, I agree, not be placed completely on those students, given that it can be exhausting just to be alive sometimes. And then educating a bunch of people on why you deserve a space is just an additional unnecessary burden.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important that the marginalized groups do have a voice in saying, like, these are the issues that we see, these are some lived experiences, and then also having like some statistics and just knowing that like these issues aren't just, they're not isolated, they are like a overall happening in physics departments. But I think that faculty having a open mind to student voices, and then taking what they say and like running with it and working to educate other faculty, and then helping to show other peers like why this education is important and how it can be integrated into our lives, is all just a really key part of taking the burden off of the marginalized groups and allowing that education to be happening so that change can be made.
Well said. All right, so let's do a quick summary because we've covered a lot of topics. How did we get here? And we'll get to the Q&A after that. So thank you all for attending, or if you're watching this after it's been recorded, thanks for watching it. So we talked about the DALI, the Department Action Leadership Institute, and the role it played in helping change the mindset of faculty in the Department of Physics in Westchester and how to enact change. And really we got an understanding of the role that these department action teams, these DATs, can play in enacting change and the way those work. And our focus at Westchester was on DEI issues. And so one of the ways that we've enacted change, we've done a lot of different things, but one of them is to support groups like UGP in amplifying their voice and thinking about ways that we can make it the department a more inclusive space for these marginalized groups. So I just want to say thank you, Murph, for coming on board and sharing your experience as president of UGP. And thank you for all the amazing work you do as president. It's really been awesome to see.
Thank you.
So I just want to get that thank you in case I forget later. But why don't we go ahead and open up the webinar to questions if there are any, Alexis.
While we wait for questions, because I know everyone was listening, I was listening and I wasn't really typing out things. One question I have were there any sort of like pitfall type things that you all experienced that you hope people could learn from so that they don't repeat it?
Excellent question. Did you want to take a stab at that first, Murph, or do you want me to go first?
I know one of the major experiences I had was a faculty who had just genuine curiosity about the necessity of groups like UGP, asking about it in a very public way, and that then encouraged or made space for like my peers to also then question the existence of the group and why it's necessary. And it just created a lot of space for discomfort for the marginalized people. So I think having the conversations is important, but being very mindful about where they're happening and who they're happening with, and just checking your tone and making sure that you're still cultivating that, like, I really want to learn and I want to know, but just be super mindful about how you're going about it.
And let me just add to the example Murph gave, which is I think as a faculty member and the advisor of the group, to be honest, I could have done a better job of facilitating discussions at the faculty level about what this group is, why is it needed. I was so focused on the group and supporting the group that I wasn't really thinking about the messaging that was happening out to the larger body of students and faculty. And so I feel like if I might have done a better job of explaining why we're moving forwards in creating this group, why is there a need for it, what we hope to accomplish with it, that would then invite faculty to come talk to me rather than the president of the student president of the group to ask questions that are curious, that are well-meaning, but could be problematic if in the wrong setting. And so I think that, really, as you're trying to make change, communicating what you're doing out to the community that you're trying to change is important, and being transparent about what you're doing and why you're doing.
And as a follow-up question, because I think that's a really good point, are there plans sort of to make that part? Because I think about that when you're talking, I was thinking about this thing like an ecosystem, which is a new phrase everybody's using for everything, to make sort of this conversation explaining what the group is, why it exists, just sort of front loading it part of the ecosystem that everyone knows from day one. Oh, the group exists, X, Y, or Z reasons. Any questions, please come to the faculty versus, or, maybe at least email versus just stopping somebody.
Yeah. No, and I think it kind of dovetails into what Murph was saying about being intentional. We haven't, Murph and I haven't talked about the plans for the upcoming academic year, but you can imagine some, yearly events that happen that are welcoming to the department, that conveys some of this information about what UGP is, why we're here, maybe doing some educating on gender identity, gender expression. There's a lot of students who come in who are confused about those things, and there's faculty who might want to go and learn. And so I can imagine creating structures, yearly structures that reinforce the existence of the group, the role we play, the work we do, and build, as well as build allies, could be an important part of that process. Rather than just waiting for problems to come along and then putting out fires as they happen. Go ahead.
Yeah. I know that I've been thinking a lot about how UGP is going to be interacting with the ecosystem in this upcoming year. And I also am taking a place on our SPS, Society of Physics Students Board. So I now hold like a position of some power in both places. And I know that I want to be intentional about using my position in UGP, this smaller physics group, and then SPS, this more broad group, to help educate on just my level and to my peers on like why we have this group and how we all can benefit from it, how we can all support each other, just so that we are all kind of intermingling and integrating into hopefully a very happy, healthy ecosystem.
Yeah, I think merging with SPS and thinking about ways, where's the overlap, where's the connection, and how can we support each other will really help with that ecosystem. Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. And I was also thinking about how much education is a continual thing, just because things change rapidly. There's all sorts of new things that I had learned about, all sorts of identities I didn't know existed. And we're all in a growth space. And I think it's wonderful to encourage people, not to be cruel, but just people who are genuinely curious and want to learn to do better, and having a nice open space for that. So we still don't have any questions yet. Are there any kinds of things you hope that, I think you both did a terrific job explaining everything. Are there any things you hope to be doing this year? I mean, I know you said you haven't really thought much about this upcoming academic year, which is fast approaching. Any hopes?
My big hope is to continue to connect with the underrepresented people, especially the incoming ones, just to like snatch them up before they like truly enter the department, so that they know that there is a group here that really wants them in the department and wants to hear their voice and see their authentic being, and then how we can all work together to continue growing this club. I know that right now we're a very small group, and my hope is that before I leave, I will be able to pass it down and put it in good hands. And I think part of that work is starting now with making sure that we are recruiting and reaching out and creating that space for the marginalized people to exist in and feel comfortable in.
Yeah, so I think building on that, thinking about how do we have a public facing website or what have you that communicates some of these values out to the local community, so students who are looking for a physics program are aware of things that are happening in our department, would be one of my hopes. And then the other hope is actually what you were saying, Alexis, about because kind of building these educational opportunities for faculty and students to come and learn more about the need for this group, and to be able to ask questions and create those safe spaces, and then ideally build allies. So those would be my hopes.
Right. Well, we are at basically top of the hour. I will give you one last chance to share any of your final thoughts.
I think just for physics people and people that are looking to join the physics community, I would hope that people feel comfortable bringing their authentic beings to departments and knowing that they are valued and that they're wanted. And I would hope that we can just slowly start to carve out this intentional space for people to exist in, so that we can all hopefully see a little more diversity in physics in the future.
And I think my final thought is, DEI work is challenging. You can get burned out from it. And so, just recognize that it's hard to change the world in one day, hard to change a department, it's hard to change these cultures, but it's also it's worth the effort. And wherever you're at, the goal isn't to solve everything, just make improvement. You know, how are you taking a step in the right direction? And along that, as much as, you know, if you can build in community as you work, don't work in isolation. You know, don't be that solo faculty member who's trying to change everything, but instead find connections with students, find connections with faculty outside the department, within the department, and build that network. Because just like we see students want to feel like they belong to succeed in physics, right? Change leaders also need that sense of belonging. They need that sense of community to help fuel the work that lies ahead, because it's going to take time. And so that would be my my other kind of final thought.
Well, great. Thank you so much, everybody, for staying on and listening to this great webinar, or, you know, watching it on YouTube. I am going to stop the recording, but I will stay on a few more minutes if people want to chat about things.